Hello and welcome to episode 298 of the Yellowwallpod. I'm your host, Stefan Butzko, and today we talk about Dortmund's pathetic 2-0 loss in the Champions League to Inter Milan, and we will preview the big game, the Revierderby in Gelsenkirchen. And for all that and more joins me Mr. Lars Pollmann. Hello Lars, how are you doing on this here in Philadelphia very delightful Thursday? I just played basketball for a couple hours to enjoy the day and try to forget about everything we are now going to talk about. So, how are you doing?
I'm fine, Stefan. I think the better idea would have been to play basketball after recording this episode in that case. But, I mean, I guess you have other things to do.
Beggars can't be choosers, you're correct. So, I have the luxury of having someone on who follows Dortmund and Inter, and I think you follow Inter quite closely. How close do you follow them?
I pretty much watch every game, listen to, I wouldn't say most, but some press conferences just to freshen up on my Italian, because as many people who learn languages know, reading is one thing, but, comprehending spoken words is quite different, so I use it in that sense too, but obviously it's mostly watching the games and enjoying the ability, I would say, to be more of a fan than I think both of us can now be with Dortmund, considering that's also how we make money. So in that sense, it was both annoying for them to be drawn together because the assumption would be that one of them will not make it to the round of 16 because of the presence of Barcelona in the group, but also it was kind of neat to kind of see the two teams pitched against each other and watching the game with a bit of differing emotions in myself, if so to say.
Yeah, please expand on that. How did this game make you feel?
It really was a bit weird. I mean, obviously I care historically, if that makes sense, more about Dortmund. That's been my club for 26 years or so. Whenever I started formulating thoughts about sports, so maybe like 25 years or 24 years, however. And with Inter, it's more of a recent thing, I would say, for the last 10 to 12 years, but really never being able to watch most of the games in Germany without, consuming weird Chinese TV streams on crappy laptops back in the day. So ever since DAZN has taken on Serie A TV rights in Germany, that's been really a catalyst for that to become much more of a thing. So with that, it was kind of weird. On the one hand, I always want Dortmund to do well or at least be interesting, and neither was the case really yesterday or during the game whenever this podcast is coming out. And on the other hand, it was nice to see Inter win a big game because obviously they've had a really good start to the season, but they lost to both Barcelona and Juventus, which were the two big games on their schedule so far. So there was that tiny bit of apprehension. How good are they really? So, I mean, I wasn't going to have a great evening either way because one of the two teams would lose or it would be a draw that Inter and Dortmund don't really gain much from. So I guess in a sense, I could at least be happy that one of the teams won.
Yeah, good for you, I guess. There was not much to be happy about in my case. But let's start from the beginning. I thought when I saw the lineup, it was going to be the same 4-4-2 that we saw against Gladbach, especially I assumed that Akanji once again would be starting as right back and so on and so forth. But we saw a 3-4-3 system, or in the defensive shape, I guess it was more of a 5-3-2 system. And we will talk about the void in a little bit. But first things, I thought it was a positive impulse for Favre to go with the back three. It's something that I wouldn't have expected. But I guess in the same breath, we have to talk about all the players that basically played out of position, some due to injury, some due to Favre's thinking. So what did you make of the lineup that we saw in the first minute, and that I don't think really changed throughout the game?
Well, it did change when Brun Larsen came on, but that was like last chance saloon, so not really important in the greater scheme of things. I was a bit surprised as well as you were. I mean, I did expect when I saw the lineup for the Gladbach game for that to be a back three, and when that wasn't, I was so assuming, okay, that's just not how he operates, and it's not going to be a back three for this game. But it was, and I mean, if you're a positive guy, I guess you applaud Favre for going out of his own way, because he's for Favre, as we've talked about so often. I mean, he doesn't really do this kind of thing, but as I am more inclined to be negative, per usual, as regular listeners know, I would say that it also kind of reeks of a little bit of desperation, perhaps. I mean, clearly the plan, whichever it is, because there's not really a plan discernible at the moment when Dortmund are playing. It hasn't really worked, even after beating Gladbach narrowly and quite luckily, I would say. And I guess that's something you guys talked about in the previous episode. The thing is, to me, I've seen a lot of people talk about how you have to play a back three against Inter because they play Lukaku and Lautaro Martinez, so two out-and-out strikers, but neither Barcelona nor Juventus, if I'm not mistaken, played a back three and beat Inter. And I mean, Inter had really not done too well in the Champions League. They only drew against Slavia at home, and that was really lucky as well. So kind of shows the state of Dortmund at the moment, that they don't go into a game, even away in the Champions League, they don't go into the game thinking on the front foot, if that makes sense, but more thinking about how to react to the opposition. And I think that's kind of symbolic of, as I said, the state of this team at this moment. And then it depends on how you view Favre in general, I guess, how you judge this move, which obviously didn't work too well, because even though they defended pretty solidly throughout the game, or throughout, let's say, the first hour of the game, the shape brought its own problems going forward.
Yeah, I mean, if we look at how Dortmund then eventually played, I mean, we had I think Akanji as a right center half, which sort of makes sense. Then you have Hakimi, who plays as a wing back, which is also a good idea. But then, the further you go up, the more worrisome it gets with Julian Brandt and Jadon Sancho up front. I mean, yes, no Marco Reus, no Paco Alcácer, but I thought they both looked horribly out of position. Yeah, I mean, at least Akanji wasn't playing as an out-and-out right back, because I don't think this is the best idea ever. And I also believe that with the players that Dortmund have, maybe you don't have to play Hakimi as a wing back or as a right. I guess the way he interpreted that role, he was more like just a winger. That's how I saw it. I don't really thought that he was played as a wing back just because he played so far up front. I took a lot of issue, especially with having Julian Brandt up front again, because it was such a bodiless performance. And then, of course, Lars, I think this is something that's a massive peeve for the both of us, is that when Dortmund play, there's a lack of compactness between the lines. You saw, I think, the back three and the five or whatever, the defensive line, the midfield line sort of together, but especially when some players up front press, even with the assistance of Hakimi, then once they finish their pressing sequence, they turn around and look if the teammates have had and there's just nobody there, and then there's just a defender that can just turn around and play the ball without any pressure whatsoever. So that's something that really annoys me, obviously the most in the counter-pressing move, because it's only successful when the entire team does it, but also just in general, either be it in build-up or defensively, that there's just this gaping hole in midfield. And it's not a phenomena we just discovered under Lucien Favre. I think this has been around for quite some time. Do you have any explanation for why that is? Do you think there is a merit in doing it like this? Do you think that a coach like Favre sees merit in it, or do you think this is just poor discipline in positioning?
I mean, that's really tough to say, especially without being, there when the team tactics talk is held and when they train behind closed doors. I think defensively, this is kind of what Favre likes to do. I mean, he's basically all about not giving away big chances. He doesn't mind you playing cross after cross if it leads to, your defender heading the ball away, and you can take long range shots against Dortmund. They will allow that. Just try not to give away the big play, if we can use an NFL term. So I mean that I can kind of understand why they aren't, pressing with the entire team, and they are not playing a high line, especially with Weigl, Hummels and Witzel, and to an extent Delaney in the defensive center. I mean, we've talked about that lacking a bit of pace in previous episodes. So I think especially when you play against a 3-5-2 system with two out and out strikers, you don't want to hang yourself out to dry in that aspect. But I mean, as much as they are about not giving away big chances, they are about, or they should be about, and if they want to play as Favre plays, they are about creating big chances themselves. They recycle possession, so they don't take the hopeful shots. They don't want to cross the ball in against a packed box. They want to find the gaps and openings, and that will take time. So I don't see how being so outmanned and having basically no one in the box. I mean, yesterday in the game against Inter, twice in the first, 20 minutes or so, Nico Schulz was the furthest ahead of Dortmund's players. And I mean, it might be a good idea to get Schulz as far away from the touchline as possible, because he was horrible in possession against Inter, but he's still not your best avenue for a threat on goal. So I have no real answer to your question, and no real idea as to how this all fits in a greater plan of Favre's, or if there even is one at this point. Kind of feels like in possession they are mostly going through the motions, trying to get the ball to dangerous players more so than dangerous areas. So recently it's been mostly the pace of Hakimi, and when Reus is available, give him the ball in the channels and, hope that they can make something happen, because quite clearly and quite frankly, the team's positional play and the schemes and whatever you want to say, it's just not really there. So most of Dortmund's attacking is basically what we call hero football these days, and yes. That's something that Bayern also suffer from, but the difference is that Bayern have Robert Lewandowski, and
they have more heroes,
and Philippe Coutinho, and even Joshua Kimmich, who's really good at crossing as opposed to Dortmund's players. So I mean, there are parallels, and in the Bundesliga table, I mean, they are really close, but I think the issue runs deeper for Dortmund, especially because, as we talked about earlier, the lack of compactness also goes as far as their defense, which, is then a real problem.
Yeah, you see, back in the day on this podcast, I don't want to say I coined the term automatism, but I talked a lot about it. And the thing is, I try to restrain myself from it because it would get annoying at some point. But here I am again, and I feel like this is. I just don't see it. I don't see any freaking automatism whatsoever. First of all, I think the positional play in possession is dire. Dortmund seem to have like a necklace or a collar that dogs wear when there's a invisible electric fence, and whenever they hit the final third or the final 20 meters or so, they just get shocked or zapped or whatever, and then have to just reshuffle the ball. That is, I think, mostly down to because, as you just said, they're trying to find the gaps, but there aren't any gaps because their positional play is just downright terrible. And it also, to me, looks completely uncoordinated, and it looks stale like 5-week-old bread. And it's just really annoying to see that there is no chemistry. I feel like the team chemistry is being sucked out with every game more and more. I mean, we had the same rants and same complaints after the Freiburg game and so many other games, but here I am again, and I feel like the runs we see being made into the box or whatever are more of an individual event than a sequence. I'm not seeing any trigger events, let's call them. I do not see that one player is making a run or hinting at a run and doing something else that triggers something else where players recognize a certain pattern and then act on it and run a certain route. I just do not see it, and we have had it before in many successful ways. We had it with Thomas Tuchel, we had it with Jürgen Klopp, and I think we even had a couple of things and schemes with Favre in the past, but right now everything that you can draw on the board, maybe that you can train on the pitch, has completely broken down, and either maybe has been deciphered and Dortmund have to come up with new stuff. I don't know how it then works on the football field, but obviously these players have a lot of intuition, but I also think there are a couple of spaces at least where you know where someone makes a run, just that you have the advantage of knowing first where a run is being made, and then obviously the defender can react as quickly. It's a very simple concept, and I do not see it at all. So I don't know what you want to call it, if you want to call it automatism, if you want to call it synergy, but to me this is completely lacking, and in the end maybe the most frustrating part, because if we look at the players on the field, if we see Jadon Sancho, Julian Brandt, Torgan Hazard, this is and Hakimi, I think this is a front four, if you will, that can really excite, and there's a lot of creative potential there, but it's just not being unleashed. And I wonder a lot how much that has to do with Favre trying to be patient, as you said, to create that big chances then in the end never actually happen, or if it's down to the players. So I don't really have an explanation for it. Lars, do you have one?
No, and I think that's kind of been the major discussion point over the last few weeks. And I mean, certainly now it seems like there's a consensus brewing that even if it's not all the coach's fault, because it never is, that it seems like that's where we will land on eventually. I mean, given the last few performances and the ambitions that the club has given out before the season, and basically the entire development of Dortmund, not only in this season, but in the calendar year of 2019. I think we are probably closer to the end with either Lucien Favre's playing style or Lucien Favre as Dortmund head coach, period. So I don't know that there's an answer that you can kind of put it in percentages or whatever, whose fault it is to that degree and whose fault it is to this degree. I think ultimately it always falls on the head coach to get the best out of the players at his disposal. And I think you are absolutely delusional if you think that Lucien Favre is even getting close. And that's, again, not a thing that's been coming up recently, but that's been a consistent theme since the start of the year, basically. I mean, I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but basically Dortmund have in the Bundesliga won points at the same rate as Bayer Leverkusen under Peter Bosch. And now, with this Inter game in the Champions League, Dortmund have also looked like Bayer Leverkusen under Peter Bosch, in Europe. So that's not necessarily a great role model to strive after.
Yeah, this is very true. But I mean, the other thing is, if we do not want to talk about only the coach, and trust me, we'll talk about him in a second because of the things he says. But also, please do me a favor real quick and try to count from the starting 11 all the players that are currently in good to very good form, or decent to very good form.
Me, Birki,
yes,
Witzel, and that's it.
Yeah, I would agree. Hummels.
But he gave away a penalty against Inter. He should have given one away against Gladbach. So I'm not going to say he's been very good over the last 2 games at least. But
no, this is why I said decent.
Generally speaking, I would really agree with putting him in there as well. Yeah, and I mean maybe Weigl too, but you know they've still conceded a lot of chances with him at centre back. But he's been better than Akanji, if that's any consolation.
Yeah, I think Weigl has been decent too, like okay-ish, not in the bad form. That's why I'm trying to get at. And the list obviously isn't as long as the list of players that I feel like are in horrible form. Now, the good news is that is something that can obviously change, and I think with the amount of talent in there is bound to change, and we would all hope it changes. Where toward the more critical stage of the season,
which is now,
when maybe, yeah, well, if you want, I mean, obviously the season's always the amount of criticalness or whatever is always the same mathematically, but I mean, you still need to have your form down the stretch, obviously, or you can forget about it, as we've learned last season. So I'm hoping for the upside, but to me, it's actually a little bit shocking that there's, so that there are so few players that where I say, yep, they are in a good personal form, and that's just what I wanted to highlight a little bit, and I guess then we can move on, because I was taken aback a little bit by what Lucien Favre said after the game, and he said to Sky, I think we played quite well. Our defensive performance was okay. We played patiently and didn't concede many counterattacks. In the second half, we had 2 to 3 chances to equalize. You can't expect to get 10 chances against such a good side. I tweet-quoted that with Spittag. You said something about delusional. I feel like this is the very definition of gaslighting. Like I see one thing and then someone comes and tells me it is not what I've seen. What do you make of such a statement, and is it helpful?
I mean, no, it isn't helpful, but I also don't take Lucien Favre all that seriously in front of cameras and, press conferences and the like. I mean, he is who he is, and I think that's not something that we are only learning now. So he's not ever going to be great with the media. He's not ever going to be engaging with the fans. He wasn't supposed to be. I think that's partly why they got Sebastian Kehl in as well. I mean, he is supposed to take some responsibilities away from talk, not only because he's been at it for basically 25 years full stop, but also because you need more voices to be visible when your head coach basically doesn't have one. And so to me, I mean, obviously this is really annoying to hear the head coach of a team after such an abysmal basically performance go out and say that he was happy with it, because that tells you at least partly why Dortmund are playing as they are playing at the moment, because, you know, if that was how he talked to the team, but even if I'm very critical of Lucien Favre, I can't believe that internally he would look at this game after studying the tape and go to his team and say, hey, that was really good. Do the same thing against Schalke and we will be successful. I can't, even the biggest Favre hater, if you like, can't really think that's going to be the case. So I was annoyed, taken aback as well as you were, but I mean, 24 hours or so later, I don't think in the grand scheme of things, anything that Favre says in front of the media needs to be taken particularly seriously.
All right, I think that's fair enough. I wrote a bit of a cynical piece at San Siro. Dortmund conserve energy for Revierderby. That's just what I felt like writing, so I did. And I think that means we can also move on, because we are a little bit constrained for time. Lars, I, for the first time in a very long time, are very negative about what is arguably going to happen at the Veltins Arena. I don't think this is going to bode well for Dortmund. The good news about the Revierderby is it doesn't care about what I think, and is sometimes very achronical, or however you want to call it, describe it. So this is obviously a massive chance for Dortmund to redeem themselves from this performance, and also maybe the last weeks or so. But on the other hand, I feel like if Dortmund show another, let's say, passive, uninterested, or as Lucien Favre would call it, patient performance where you just don't see any urgency, I think this could really light the tree on fire. So going into this game, how do you think, how important do you think it is for Dortmund to come away with a good result? And do you think there are going to be consequences in, you know, a massive mood swing more than we've seen after this game, should Dortmund really screw this up again?
I mean, I can't really see, you know, heads rolling or whatever.
No, but you know what I mean.
Unless, you know, they get like pummeled by Schalke, which I don't think is a particularly likely scenario, just because of the nature of the Revierderby, which has typically been a close encounter, in which oftentimes the worst side going into the game came out on top, as you alluded to earlier. So that's something to be hopeful about, I guess, even though Dortmund are ahead of Schalke in the Bundesliga standings. But I think if we look at, you know, the starting points, and the relative starting points and ambitions ahead of the season, I think Schalke will be much happier with their results so far than Dortmund, rightfully so. So, I mean, I think the Revierderby has kind of lost some of its appeal over the last few years. I think, with Dortmund being the number 2 side in Germany, a lot of focus, especially internationally, of course, but also within Germany, to me, has kind of switched over to the Bayern-Dortmund rivalry, which, as we've talked about so often on this show, isn't really the historically fierce rivalry between those two teams. And obviously for locals, the Schalke-Dortmund rivalry is so much more important. But I think, you know, in the greater scheme of things, it has lost some of its appeal with the internationalization of, you know, the Bundesliga football and all that. I mean, we don't have to really get into this right now, but so it's not like the derby is the most important fixture of the season as it may have been, you know, 10 years ago or 15 years ago. So, I mean, obviously it's going to be important to come away with a good result, or at least a good performance and a decent result, which I guess would be a draw. But I really can't see, you know, changing or this changing too much about how Dortmund are perceived, because as I alluded to earlier, this current slump or whatever, it's not a current slump, but a slump that has been going on since December of 2018, or if we want to exclude the win at Leipzig on the first match day of the second half of last season, then since I think early February. So given all that, it's still Schalke, it's still the derby, so there's always going to be more importance on this than most games, but still it's not as it was once.
So what we're seeing at Schalke right now is actually a transformation to the positive. I mean, it couldn't get much worse, to be honest, but they didn't make a lot of big changes. Nevertheless, I mean, they've added Kenny on John Joe Kenny on the right back side, and they have Rahman and who's the other guy who's very fast up front? Is that Rahman?
I mean, there's Benito Rahman, there's Rabbi Matondo.
Yes, yeah, Matondo. This is he might actually play, and he's a very fast striker up front. So there is a bit of new blood. But overall, I think the team isn't all that different from last season. My point is that David Wagner has managed to transform Schalke in a way that a lot of Dortmund fans would hope could happen to their own team now, and is that they just go out there and fight. And it's actually working out. I mean, they make life tough for other opponents. They won away to Leipzig. Yes, they just lost to Hoffenheim, but for the first time in a long time, I actually saw a Schalke game where they were the better side and lost. Usually the story is Schalke are the worst team and somehow win. But for the first time in a long time, they won the midfield battle, had more possession and whatnot, but then just lost on a counter. So there is new life in Schalke 04. David Wagner has performed the miracle. So I think this let's say newfound feistiness of Schalke, which they usually show in the derby anyway, should make them favorites for this game. How do you see this matchup shaping up? I think it's going to be a very brutal and very incoherent game. What do you think will happen?
Well, just to circle back real quick, I think it's important to make a point of what you said. Schalke are playing like the fans expect Schalke to play under David Wagner, and that's indeed something that a lot of Dortmund fans will hope is going to be the case at Dortmund again at some point. I think we've talked a lot about how Dortmund have kind of lost a discernible identity that reconciles on the pitch with off the pitch, because this is the working class club. Both Dortmund and Schalke are, but Dortmund are also trying to win championships and trying to develop the best talent in the world and trying to sign great players and all that. So that there seems to be a disconnection between on and off the field at Dortmund, and there used to be at Schalke as well, but David Wagner, as you said, kind of miraculously has kind of reconciled both of these aspects. And I mean, it's still early doors, and I'm sure they're going to run into some form of crisis because it's still Schalke, and that's just how this club operates, and
it's just physics.
Yeah, and to be honest, that's why a lot of people are drawn to Schalke too. I mean, they are never boring, if nothing else. I mean, that's something that a lot of people are kind of drawn to. So, having said all that, in terms of the game on Saturday, I would agree with you that Schalke should be considered favorites, even though I think the betting markets are going to peg Dortmund as favorites, but they're kind of dumb, especially in Germany. Given Dortmund's performances over the last few weeks, I would expect Schalke to come out really physical. I mean, it's the derby, so they would do that anyway, but I think they're going to test Dortmund early, whether they're up for this kind of game, for this kind of scrap or not.
I think we've already seen a test, and that was against Inter, where Inter was, I think, quite physical, a lot of hidden fouls here and there, and Dortmund just didn't know how to respond. So I really fear the worst, because so far these Dortmund players have not shown that they are really up for a derby whatsoever. So my I'm feeling very grim about it, and I really hope that Dortmund can show a different face for once. Do you think that will be the case? Do you actually think there is going to be some fight in those players that we haven't seen for now?
You would hope so, right? I mean, if last season is any indication, the first derby, the 2-1 away win at Schalke, that was a decent derby performance of Dortmund. I think they were the better side. They did accept the fight. I think that was kind of the best Delaney game we've seen, and he's certainly going to be in the lineup as well because it's Lucien Favre and Thomas Delaney, and there are few better love stories in the world. So I think or let's put it this way, if they don't show the desire and hunger and fight and all these buzzwords that we typically don't want to talk about on this show because they are easy explanations for not easy problems. I think in this case, it kind of comes down to these easy explanations. Do they want it enough? Do they show enough fighting spirit to lean against the budding crisis, if you like? I mean, I think they need to understand that this game is not only the opportunity to, lose something in terms of, fan support and also obviously league standing and whatever, because I think Bayern are not going to keep dropping points against Minnow. So, you've kind of used up your luck in that regard. It's also the opportunity, to kind of, maybe get to that turnaround point where you can look back on in a few weeks or months and say, hey, remember when we really laid it all out against Schalke and got away with that scrappy win that kind of propelled us into our position now, which is obviously great and whatever. If they don't do that, then I think that says quite a lot about the construction of this team, the characters in this team, and where they are going to end up, which I mean is not going to be as a memorable, successful Dortmund side. I think that's saying too much and putting too much in a derby, which I said 5 minutes ago wasn't as important as it used to be, but maybe.
Well, I knew you would come around.
Maybe I talked myself into a corner here, but I don't care. I think this is going to be a real test for, character and mettle and fight and spirit and, overall capacity in this Dortmund team.
Yeah, I think we can close it out now here. If we look back to last season, and there were a couple of games where Dortmund showed some real resiliency when they went down. There were a lot of come from behind wins and whatnot. Right now, when this happens, I don't see the same. I don't see Dortmund being that resilient. And this game really is a chance for them to rediscover that, because there will be moments where Dortmund have to be very resilient. You just said correctly that Dortmund offer a lot of shots from distance. Guess what? Schalke have a lot of players that can really score from distance. Just thinking of Daniel Caligiuri, for example. So, in general, Schalke is a bit of Dortmund's boogie side in many ways, and also just the characteristics that Schalke have that Dortmund don't have. So, to me, this really goes to show, what Dortmund are all about, or what they are not all about, and this might further shape the narrative. Who knows? Last question, Lars. Marco Reus has been he played with a cold against Gladbach and then was out due to a cold against Inter. I don't know how fit he will be, but irregardless of that, maybe it's a bit of blasphemy to ask this question, but I think I can't remember a good Marco Reus performance in the derby. I feel like there's something with this game that does something to Marco Reus that makes him perform completely. I don't know how to describe it, but he's just not himself. This game just gets maybe too much in his head. And with this body of negative evidence, would you maybe just keep him out of this game?
Maybe I would. I mean, on top of not being great in derbies so far, and I mean he's 30, so there is a body of work to judge upon. He's also not been great this season, period. I mean, even in games where he scored, and I mean, his scoring record in the Bundesliga is still fine, and the expected goals are fine and all that. But I mean, he scored a brace against Leverkusen, had a nondescript performance, for example. I think he's not been great, so far this season. So, you would think about maybe leaving him out of games, but I don't think Schalke is the game. And also there's really not a better alternative in sight. I mean, Julian Brandt hasn't done anything to suggest he should be starting games at this point, even though obviously he's not played in his preferred position. And I put some, if not most of the blame in Brandt's poor run of form on the plate of the coaching staff, but it's still a matter of fact that he hasn't been any better than Reus. So that would seem to be like an overcorrection of sorts. So if Reus is deemed fit enough to play even 60 minutes, he's definitely going to be in the starting 11. And, you know, who knows? He's bound to have a good performance against Schalke eventually, I guess. So why not here?
Yeah, I mean, Marco Reus had good performances against Schalke when he played for Gladbach.
Unless Jermaine Jones tried to break his big toe. Yeah.
Toe. Yeah.
But I think he even scored in that game too, I think.
Okay. Yeah. Anyway, before we go, a quick prediction.
2-0 Schalke.
All right. I'm not going to predict anything for Schalke in this game, so I'm going with a 2-1 Dortmund Hausfrauen-Tipp. So yeah, that's it. If people want to send compliments or complaints to you on Twitter, how can they do that?
Yeah, my handle is Stefan Butzko.
Okay, you can find me at Lars Pollmann on Twitter. And if you want to get in touch with all of us, do that at Yellowwallpod on Twitter or Facebook. If you want to subscribe to the show, go to our YouTube, Stitcher, iCloud, iTunes. Don't go to our iCloud. We don't have one. iTunes, and Spotify or SoundCloud. That's what I meant. And, yeah, I hope we will be in better spirits next week than we are this week, because it's been shit. Let's just name it as it is. But as always, everyone out there, thank you for listening. And, yeah, we'll be back next week. Goodbye. So, jetzt hätte ich fest auf Auflegen gedrückt, anstatt auf Stop Recording.